I'm very interested in how belief is translated into action. And I think that Gulen says a lot about this. His whole life is a testimony to this. Interfaith dialogue is something that Hizmet is very involved in Washington. And again, my experience of this is living. Students. I'm Professor John Farina. I'm currently a professor of religious studies at George Mason University, which is in Northern Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C. My background is that I have a Ph.D. in religious studies, also a law degree. And I have worked, before becoming a professor, I was working in religious publishing for a large Catholic publishing company called the Paulist Press in New York City for about 12 years. And probably the most notable thing I did there was to edit a series of books called The Classics of Western Spirituality, in which we did classical works translated into English from Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Now, most of the books were from the Christian tradition because we were a Catholic publisher, but we went out of our way to include Islamic texts. And many of those texts were from the Sufi tradition. We did Ibn Arabi, we did Rumi, we did others. I am particularly interested in Hizmet because of my background in talking about the social expressions of religion. Here is a man, Gulen, who had these deeply spiritual experiences, thinks about himself as a spiritual leader primarily, but has developed this whole social network to go out and meet needs of children, in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, and other things. And to me, that is what is so fascinating. I mean, how do you get from belief to action? I'm very interested in how belief is translated into action. And I think that Gulen says a lot about this. His whole life is a testimony to this. I mean, how many people just talk? Maybe they even talk in writing, but it's just talk. And you see this so much in academia, in the academy. I must admit, very often, when I go to a scholarly conference and I look at the things people are talking about, it's humorous. It literally fits every stereotype of preposterously detached, unrealistic, impractical thinking that no one cares about. So that is not what I think religion is about. Religion isn't simply intellectual speculation about God. That may be philosophy, that may be theology, not even theology. Because theology, as one famous Catholic in the Middle Ages, St. Anselm said, is faith seeking understanding. So it starts off with the personal act of I believe, credo. Therefore, how do I think about other things? And therefore, how do I act? How do I live? How do we act? I mean, that is ultimately, if these thoughts don't impact our actions, they're just idle speculations. And so I think that Gulen talks a lot about that. And more importantly, lives it in this extraordinary way. I mean, we all know how hard it is to get anything done. And how hard it is especially to get other people to go along with us. And I tried to start a little program in Washington here of offering some mentoring to some underprivileged students in high school. I got 3 people to express interest. That's it. So now, what does it take in me to persist? And this is why I so admire somebody like Gulen, who has built so much. I mean, obviously the temptation is to just say, forget it. These people aren't interested. They're not going to cooperate. Maybe it's a bad idea. You know, we all have so many reasons to just be discouraged, to give up. But what does it take to actually persist and build something as significant as the Hizmet network? It takes extraordinary patience and commitment. Interfaith dialogue is something that Hizmet is very involved in. The Rumi Forum in Washington is an interfaith dialogue center. It would be interesting to think of ways in which Rumi and the Rumi Forum and the work of Hizmet and Gulen are parallel, the way they draw on one another. Well, I think that one thing that's most obvious is that Rumi broke the molds of expectation. You have this in many religious traditions. You have this even in Hinduism, with certain schools of Hinduism that would talk about having to shock people out of the ordinary, because we get into the habit of thinking we know what good is, we know what evil is, we know what God is. But in another sense, we don't know what God is, do we? I mean, every time we say something about God, we're limiting him by the words we use. We say God is good. We're limiting God to our conception of goodness. We say God is our Father. Well, that means he's kind of like my father. And so very often scholars from different traditions, especially those concerned with the mystical dimension, have said, how do we break this all open? How do we shock people out of the ordinary expectations so they can get this fresh, surprising sense of God? And of course, Rumi was a master of that. He would talk about the everyday. It would seem like he's talking about wine or women or leisure, and he's behind it. There's another moment, that moment of transcendence, that moment of epiphany, when suddenly that God breaks through in our ordinary lives in that moment of realization. So maybe that's what Gulen is about. Maybe by doing these works of mercy, doing these works of compassion, building a better world, we will see another part of God. It's interesting to think of some of the controversies around Gulen in Turkey today. And again, my experience of this is limited to actually some things I experienced here, being at Rumi Forum events in Washington and walking out onto the sidewalk and being confronted by about 50 or 100 angry Turkish Americans with all kinds of signs, very angry at us for having been at the meeting and denouncing Gulen. Well, I talked to those people, and it was very interesting. They seemed to be Kemalists. They seemed to be living with that old conception of the secular Turkey, and thought that I might be sympathetic with that because I might fear fundamentalism or in Islam or something. And of course, I'm not sympathetic with it. But that's what they reflected. And it was also clear that this was not a spontaneous demonstration, that they were organized by somebody, I don't know whom, and that they had a very clear agenda. And they wanted to warn me that Gulen was really a political figure, not a religious figure, and that he had hidden political motives and agenda in Turkey and everywhere, actually. So I don't know that. I don't see evidence of that. It seems to me that these people represent an outmoded approach to religion in public life, that they resent somebody who is religiously motivated moving into public life. We have that in our country. We have a constant denunciation of the religious right by the mainstream media. What does that mean? Does that mean if I'm religious, I can't be involved in politics? That I can't say that my religion is the basis for my values in politics? I can certainly say that. But what I can't say is that you must vote for me simply because I'm a Christian. No, I have to give you reasons that appeal to your reason, not to your faith, and give you reasons that are political reasons to vote for me, to act in a certain way. Same thing if I have a legislation. If I say I'm anti-abortion, and I am, I can't just say because I'm a Catholic and we believe life starts at conception. No, I have to say, look at what abortion does to women. Look at what it does to the unborn. Look at the social effects. Look at the cost. It's bad. And the states there should be some limitations, more than there are now, at the minimum. But I have to make a political reasoned case for that. And Gulen certainly does that. Again, everything I observed in the works I saw in Turkey they were not specifically religious. No one would even talk to me about the religious dimension of them. And so that means they're political and they're social, and they have a universal dimension, therefore. So I think that I don't see a basis for this critique of Gulen.
I think that again, education for all, men, boys and girls, but particularly there's been a need for those in poverty, lower socioeconomic groups, and for women and girls' education. And the Hizmet movement has done a tremendous job providing vehicles for that in Turkey and around the world.
You shouldn't be dependent on the state to do everything. If I want something done, why don't I just do it? Unless there's some specific law that's preventing me from doing it. But often there isn't. And so this is what civil society organizations can do. And this is what Hizmet is doing. Voluntary organizations that respond to real needs in communities. That I see Hizmet doing.